Joaquin Rios had been driving for more than 3 decades, and at 54, his face resembled a map of Mexican highways, weathered, serious, unadorned. He lived alone in a small apartment in San Luis Potosí with an old coffee maker, a worn mattress, and a wall with a single framed photo, that of his daughter taken more than 10 years ago. Since their divorce, they haven't spoken. His routine was as fixed as the clock on his truck, loading merchandise, checking tire pressure, driving, sleeping at rest stops. He ate the same thing almost every day. He never hitchhiked, never deviated from the road, never shared his thoughts, not even with himself. That morning, however, something different surrounded him. It wasn't the weather, which was dry as always on the border between Zacatecas and Aguascalientes, but a feeling, as if something were pushing him to be more alert. He was driving empty, on his way to pick up a load of tools from a factory. Just around a long curve, he saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman, motionless, standing on the side of the road, dressed in white. She didn't seem to be asking for help or moving. She was simply there. Without knowing why, Joaquin slowed down and stopped. He didn't think twice. He opened the passenger door, and she got in without a word. Only when they were on the move again did she speak for the first time. "Now it's you they're going to take." If this story has already captivated you, don't continue reading without subscribing. This channel really needs your support to continue. Joaquin didn't respond immediately. He kept staring at the road as if those words weren't meant for him, but they were. "Take me where?" he finally murmured, without turning his face. She didn't answer. She took a small handkerchief from her dress pocket and placed it on her legs, as if she were preparing something important. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was dense, full of meaning. After a few kilometers, he dared to glance at her. Her face was serene, expressionless and unsmiling, but her eyes held a depth that disarmed him inside. She reminded him of his mother's just before she died, as if they knew something he didn't yet. They continued in silence to a gas station. Joaquin stopped the truck, more out of habit than necessity. She got out with him, walking slowly, unhurriedly. As they entered the store, the manager, a robust woman in her 60s, looked at her and crossed herself. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked nervously. Joaquin nodded, not understanding her reaction. When he paid for his coffee, the woman in white approached him and said, "Today you're going to run into someone who's saying goodbye." She didn't explain further. She just got back into the truck. Joaquin felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know if he was dreaming, but something inside him had already begun to change. Are you feeling something while reading this? Then subscribe now. This way, you'll help us continue, telling stories that leave a lasting impression. Barely 20 minutes after leaving the gas station, Joaquin spotted a car stopped with its lights flashing on the side of the road. He hesitated, but something, perhaps the woman's words, made him stop. A young man with red eyes and a shaky voice got out. "Can you take me to the hospital in Aguascalientes? My mother is dying." "The car overheated," he explained. Joaquin nodded without thinking twice and helped him get in. In the back seat, the young man settled in while trying to hide his tears. The woman in white, without turning her head, said softly, "You'll make it in time." The young man looked at her, surprised but didn't ask who she was. During the drive, the young man haltingly recounted how he hadn't seen his mother in days because of an absurd argument. When they told him she was in a coma, he felt like his world was falling apart. "I don't want to be stuck with this," he said, clenching his fists. Joaquin, listening, silently recalled his own story. His father had died when he was 17, and he never had the chance to apologize. He never visited him in the hospital. That wound, which he thought was closed, opened without warning. When they arrived at the hospital, the young man thanked her between sobs and ran inside. The woman in white looked at him and said, "One less." Joaquin, not understanding, got back behind the wheel with a lump in his throat. After dropping the young man off at the hospital, Joaquin detoured to a truck stop on the outskirts. He didn't usually make detours, but he felt like he needed to breathe. While he ate a burrito with watery coffee, the woman in white sat across from him, not touching anything. The other diners seemed not to notice her, or if they did, they didn't react. Joaquín began to suspect something wasn't right, but he didn't dare ask. "Did you know that boy would arrive on time?" he blurted out. She looked him straight in the eyes without blinking. "I'm just there for you. The rest is up to you." Those words made him tremble internally, as if the knowledge of being guided was confronting him with something deeper. As he left the rest stop, he found a woman crying at the side of a gas station, holding a child. She was pale and desperate. "He has a fever, it won't go down, and I have nothing to move. I don't know what to do anymore," she pleaded through tears. Joaquín opened the truck door without saying a word. As she placed the child in the back seat, the woman in white was already seated, her hands clasped in her lap. On the way to the nearest health center, the child began to breathe more calmly. The mother glanced in the rearview mirror again and again, as if she wanted to reassure herself that she wasn't alone. Joaquín didn't ask anything. He just felt a strange certainty. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. After dropping the woman and her son off at the clinic, Joaquín returned to the truck feeling like he'd been part of something bigger than himself. He didn't know how to explain it, but that day no longer seemed like just another day. He turned on the radio looking for a distraction, but no song could calm the unease that had settled in his chest. "How long are you going to keep running away from yourself?" the woman in white asked from her seat, without raising her voice. Joaquín swallowed. He didn't know if she was referring to his past, his family, or that silent pain he'd been carrying inside for years. But something in him broke, and he didn't respond. He just kept driving, as if the roar of the engine could hide the trembling in his hands. The next stop was at a highway intersection where, according to the GPS, he had to wait a few hours until the loading dock opened. As he got out of the truck to stretch his legs, a street musician was playing a sad melody on a visibly damaged guitar. He had a bandaged leg and an expression that mixed pride with defeat. Joaquín stared at him for a few seconds until the man approached him. "Are you going north? I need to get to Torreón. My daughter is there, and I don't know if she'll forgive me." The truck driver hesitated. That was enough for one day, he thought. But when he looked at the woman in white, she nodded slightly, and without saying anything, Joaquín opened the passenger door again. During the trip, the musician recounted how he had abandoned his daughter when she was young. He had been an absent father, an addict living between highways and bars. "I left believing I was doing her a favor, and now I don't know if I deserve to go back," he said, while tuning the rusty strings of his guitar. Joaquín didn't usually talk to strangers, but he found himself telling her that he too had left things unresolved. He told her about his daughter, how a silly argument had driven them apart, and how pride had been stronger than love for years. It was the first time in a long time that he had verbalized his guilt. The woman in white listened without intervening, as if she knew every word before it was spoken. "If you're still here, it's because this story touched you. Show it by subscribing to the channel. It's the only way we can continue." Upon arriving in Torreón, the musician got out with an uncertain gait. He glanced back before closing the truck door. "Thank you, not for the ride, but for making me talk," he said. Joaquín watched him drive away until he disappeared into the streets. When he got back behind the wheel, the woman in white murmured, "Everyone has their moment. He's already found his. Now you just need to find yours." Joaquín didn't know how to respond. For the first time in years, he longed to return to the town where he was born. He wasn't sure why, but something was calling him. Something he had avoided for decades. Something he perhaps needed to face before moving forward. Joaquín changed his route without telling anyone. He called for an impromptu permit and headed for his hometown, San Miguel del Mesquite, a corner lost among hills and mesquite trees in northern Zacatecas. He hadn't set foot there for more than 30 years. When he passed through the rusty entrance arch, everything seemed smaller. Don Beto's little store no longer existed. The field was empty. and his mother's house, though neglected, was still standing. He parked the truck in front of the wooden gate and stood inside for a few minutes, motionless. The woman in white said nothing. She just gently touched his shoulder. Joaquín got out, walked to the small patio, and unable to contain himself, knelt before his mother's grave in the back lot. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There were no screams or unbridled tears. Just a mature man, defeated by guilt and time, silently asking for forgiveness. "I'm sorry for not coming back, for not being there, for hiding from you, and from me," he murmured, his forehead resting on the worn tombstone. He remained there for several minutes until the sun began to set behind the hills. When he stood up, his body felt lighter, as if each word spoken had released an ancient weight. As he returned to the truck, the woman in white looked at him for the first time with a slight smile. "Now we can continue," she said. Joaquín, not fully understanding, started the engine with a distinct knot in his chest. It wasn't pain, it was peace. If you felt something right now, please subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories like this. Oni. As dusk fell over the highway, Joaquín drove silently, aimlessly. He no longer thought about deliveries or schedules. He just drove. It was then that the woman in white said in a soft voice, "There's still one more visit." He didn't ask where. He simply followed the sign she indicated, turning onto a dirt road that led toward the Oaxaca mountains. The landscape changed completely. Sharp curves, dense vegetation, absolute silence. After hours of climbing along almost abandoned roads, they reached an open area surrounded by tall trees and clean air. Joaquín stopped the truck. "Here?" he asked. She nodded. "Get off just this once." At first he thought it was crazy, but something stronger than logic drove him down. He walked through the trees, guided only by intuition, until he saw a figure sitting on a rock, facing backward. As he approached, his heart began to pound. It was an older man, with gray hair and a serene posture. When he turned around, Joaquín stopped dead in his tracks. It was his father, or at least someone with his face, his expression, his presence. It couldn't be. His father had died decades ago. "Hello, son," the figure said. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a presence that spoke with the same voice Joaquín remembered, and that voice told him, "You no longer have to carry what was never before." Joaquín froze. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The figure of his father gestured for him to sit next to him. He did. His legs shaking, his heart pounding. It wasn't a dream. Everything felt real, more real than anything else in his life. "I've seen how you've lived, son. Always moving, but without a destination. Always strong, but without rest," the voice said. Joaquín clenched his fists, holding back tears. "I failed. You, Mom, my daughter. I walked away from everyone." The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "You walked away from yourself. But it's never too late to come back." Joaquín closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he wept uncontrollably. When he returned to the truck, the woman in white was waiting for him. She didn't ask any questions. She just placed her hand on the dashboard, as if closing a cycle. "Now you're ready," she said with profound calm. Joaquín nodded, not fully understanding what ready meant, but something inside him had aligned. He felt complete. Not different, but whole. He started the engine, and the road unfolded before him again, but it wasn't the same. Neither was he. He didn't have a clear destination, but for the first time, that didn't bother him. The woman in white looked out the window again. "From now on, you choose who to take." The following weeks were different. Joaquín stopped taking on contract routes. He sold part of his fleet, quit his permanent contracts, and began driving by choice. He stopped at stations, small towns, dusty intersections. There was always someone who needed to get somewhere, and without asking questions, he opened the door for them. He gave rides to a grandfather who wanted to see the sea before he died, to a child who needed surgery in the capital, to a woman fleeing a violent relationship. Each story was different, but they all touched him deeply, as if that were their purpose. to carry, to listen, to hold. One day, he transported a teenager who was escaping from a trafficking ring. He found him hiding behind some empty drums in a loading area. The boy didn't speak, just stared with terrified eyes. Joaquín didn't hesitate. He got him in, gave him water and food, and took him to a specialized shelter in Ciudad Juarez. During the trip, the young man didn't say a word, but when he got out, he left him a pencil drawing, a truck with wings. Joaquín kept it in his wallet like an amulet. That night, while he was sleeping in the truck's bunk, the woman in white appeared standing by the door, as always. "When you help without asking, you heal without knowing," she whispered before disappearing. As the months passed, Joaquín's name began to circulate among forgotten communities, parishes, shelters, and way stations. "The truck driver who helps," some said. Others simply called him the one with the woman in white. Although no one else saw her, everyone felt something different was happening when he arrived. Once, a young pregnant woman approached him in a remote village in Durango. Her delivery had come early, and the nearest hospital was 2 hours away. Joaquín didn't hesitate. He accelerated like never before, braving the curves and the rain. They arrived just in time. The baby was born healthy. The grateful mother wanted to pay him. He simply replied, "All I ask is that you hold her tight every day." One afternoon, he stopped the truck at a rural school. A teacher signaled desperately. There was a little girl who urgently needed to be taken to the doctor. The ambulance hadn't arrived. Joaquín picked her up in his arms and carefully placed her on a blanket. In the back, the journey was tense with her fever rising, but he managed to stabilize her with cold cloths and the help of a nurse he found at a gas station. Upon arriving at the medical center, the girl was treated and regained consciousness. Before Joaquín left, she took his hand and said, "Thank you for not passing me by." That phrase stayed with him for days, because for a long time, he had passed by his own life. One night, while sleeping at a gas station in Hidalgo, Joaquín dreamed of his daughter. He saw her as a little girl, running through the garden of the house he had abandoned after the divorce. She laughed, looked at him, and suddenly disappeared behind a door he could never open. He woke up sweating, his heart pounding. He couldn't avoid that pain any longer. The next morning, he looked for her number among old papers and dialed it. The call was brief, awkward. "Dad?" she asked on the other end, surprised. Joaquín didn't know what to say. He just said, "I'm in your city. If you want, I'll stop by." There was a long silence, and then, "Okay, but just for a while." When they met, Joaquín felt the years weigh more than ever. She had the same sparkle in her eyes, but with a distance that hurt. They sat on a park bench, unsure how to begin. He spoke first. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't justify his absence. He just told her what he'd been doing, the trips, the people, the woman in white. She listened to him in silence, and although at first she seemed skeptical, a tear escaped when he said, "I'm not looking for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I've changed. Not so you'd accept me, but because I couldn't go on like this anymore." Before leaving, she hugged him, short, tense, but real, and that was enough. After seeing his daughter, Joaquín parked the truck in front of a lonely overlook. It was night, and the sky was clear, dotted with stars. He stood there in silence, staring at the horizon, holding his daughter's photo. Inside, he felt something important had been unlocked. The woman in white appeared, sitting beside him silently. "What now?" he asked without waiting for a reply. She smiled for the first time warmly. "Now you're still you, but different." Joaquín understood there would be no grand revelations or spectacular endings. The miracle had already happened. He was present in his own life, awake, available. The next day, while driving through a rural area of Michoacán, a young man stopped him in the middle of the road. His clothes were torn, and he had an old backpack on his shoulder. He asked him for a ride to the next town. Joaquín agreed without hesitation. During the ride, the boy told them he'd been in prison for a past mistake, and that he was now looking for his brother to try to rebuild what was left of his family. Joaquín listened without judgment. When the young man got out, he shook his hand firmly and said, "Thank you for treating me like a person." That's when Joaquin realized something. Every person who got into his truck wasn't just looking for a destination. They were looking for dignity, a listening ear, and companionship. And he was willing to offer them. On another occasion, an elderly woman signaled from a sidewalk in a dusty town. She was carrying a bag of bread and a sad look on her face. Joaquin pulled up. "Are you going to Santa Maria del Oro?" she asked. He nodded. Along the way, she talked about her son, who had disappeared 6 years earlier. She never stopped waiting for him. Every week, she went to leave him a letter at the bus station in case he ever returned. Joaquin listened attentively, with that new empathy he had learned to cultivate. When they arrived, he walked with her to the bench where she usually sat. She offered him a piece of bread and said, "Thank you for not being in a hurry. Everyone is in a hurry. You are not." That phrase stayed with him as a truth. Sometimes the most humane act is simply to stop. One rainy day, he picked up a couple of musicians who had lost everything in a fire. They were traveling with the clothes on their backs and a charred violin. They had no family, no home, and no clear destination. Joaquin drove them to a shelter in Puebla, but before getting out, the man asked him to play a song. He climbed into the front seat, tuned as best he could, and played a melody so melancholic it made Joaquin himself cry. When he finished, the woman, with moist eyes, told him, "Today, we felt alive again." Joaquin left them some money and food, not because they had any extra, but because he understood what it meant to receive a helping hand when everything seemed lost. He was no longer just a driver, he was a bridge. On one of his trips, while crossing an arid region of San Luis Potosí, Joaquin found a young man standing next to a broken-down bicycle. He was wearing a school backpack, his shoes were torn, and his gaze was determined. "Are you going far?" Joaquin asked as he braked. "To the university," the boy replied, proudly showing his student ID. He had walked more than 10 kilometers after his bike broke down, determined not to miss his final exam. Joaquin took him straight to campus, and along the way, they talked about dreams, struggle, and the future. As he got off, the boy looked at him gratefully and said, "Thank you for not looking at me as if I were something small." And those words, so simple, touched something deep in Joaquin, reminding him how invisible he, too, had once felt. Days later, he parked at a community fair in Oaxaca, where a woman was selling tamales under a makeshift tarp. She was pregnant and visibly tired. Joaquin bought two and sat down to eat on a nearby tree trunk. After a while, the woman approached him and asked if he could take her to the next town. "I just want to get home without getting caught in the rain," she said. During the drive, she told him how she made a living alone, without support, but without giving up. Joaquin listened silently, admiring her strength. As he left her, she touched his arm and said, "Not all men stop for a tired woman." And he, moved, simply replied, "It's not every day you meet a woman so brave." As the months passed, Joaquin began to notice that it was no longer he who chose the route, but the route that chose him. He woke up with an intuition, a feeling, a direction he didn't fully understand, but which he followed without question. And each time, someone was waiting for him. One early morning, for example, he picked up a man in a dirty suit who was walking along the shoulder of the road with an old suitcase. He didn't say much, saying only that he needed to get to the La Paz cemetery before dawn. During the trip, Joaquin learned that this man had just lost his wife and hadn't made it to the funeral in time. He wanted to leave him a letter. When they arrived, he hugged the wet ground and cried silently. Joaquin stayed inside the truck, not interrupting. He learned that sometimes helping means saying nothing. On another occasion, while crossing a mountainous region, he stopped to assist an overturned pickup truck. Inside, an elderly woman was trapped with a broken leg. Joaquin called emergency services, but knew it would take a while. Carefully, he pulled her out and laid her on his truck bed, wrapping her in blankets. She was shivering, but not from the cold. She was afraid of dying alone. Joaquín took her hand and said, "You're not alone. I'm here." They spent almost an hour together until the ambulance arrived. Before leaving, the woman whispered in his ear, "You're like an angel without wings." Joaquín didn't know what to say. He only felt that, for some reason he still didn't understand, he was where he belonged. At a roadside stop in Veracruz, a girl approached him while he was pumping gas. She was about 9 years old, with broken shoes and her hair tied back with a frayed colored elastic. "Are you the guy with the truck with the pretty lights?" she asked, pointing to the LED strips Joaquín had installed in the cab. He nodded, smiling. "My grandma says you help the people God puts in your path." Joaquín crouched down to be at his eye level. "And you believe that?" he asked. The girl nodded vigorously. "So, can you help us? My grandma fell and can't walk to the clinic." Joaquín gave them a ride. When they arrived, the woman hugged him as if she were hugging a lost child. "There aren't many good souls on the road," she murmured. That day, when he returned to the truck, he found a small drawing on the passenger seat. The girl had left it there. It was a truck with a woman, dressed in white, sitting next to the driver. Joaquín looked at it for a long time. How was it possible the girl had drawn it if she had never seen it? He turned to his silent companion. She only said, "Some things don't need to be explained." Joaquín put that drawing next to the other one, the one of the young man who escaped the trafficking network. Both were reminders that the journey was no longer his. His truck was a sacred space, a rolling refuge, a kind of confessional where each story found a bit of redemption. One night, while crossing a lonely stretch of land in the Sierra de Guerrero, Joaquín stopped to rest. The sky was overcast and the fog thick. When he opened the truck door, he heard sobbing. He followed the sound and found a young man sitting on a rock, his head in his hands. He had cuts on his arms and a trickle of dried blood on his cheek. "Are you okay?" Joaquín asked, although the answer was obvious. The young man didn't answer. He was just trembling. Joaquín took off his jacket and put it over Joaquín's shoulders. "You don't need to say anything. But if you want to get in, I'm here." The young man looked at him with glassy eyes, hesitated for a few seconds, and got in. For hours, the young man didn't speak. Joaquín didn't force anything either. He offered him hot coffee, bread, silence. At dawn, just as the sun began to break through the fog, the boy said, "I was going to jump, not because I want to die, but because I can't stand being alone anymore." Joaquín felt a lump in his throat. He told him about his own dark nights, about the years he spent running from himself. "But one day I stopped running, and I started listening." The young man looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and relief, and it worked. Joaquín smiled for the first time that night. "Look where you are. Sometimes not. Jumping is the first miracle." Were you moved by this part? Then don't leave without subscribing. This channel needs your help to stay alive. A short time later, Joaquín received an unexpected call. It was his daughter. This time, it wasn't a fleeting visit or a tense encounter. "Can you come to Sofia's birthday party?" she asked. Joaquín was silent for a few seconds, swallowing. "Sofia, your granddaughter," she replied softly. Joaquín felt as if his heart had leapt out of his chest. He hadn't known he was a grandfather. He hadn't known he still had the chance to be part of a new story. He accepted without thinking. Driving toward the meeting, he felt something deep within him settle, like a lost piece that had finally found its place. The birthday party took place in a courtyard filled with balloons, laughter, and chocolate cake. Joaquín arrived with a simple gift, nervous as a teenager. When his daughter presented it, Sofia looked at him curiously. "Are you the old man from the truck?" she asked. He nodded, excited. They spent the afternoon together. They played, they laughed, and for the first time in a long time, Joaquín felt part of something real. As they said goodbye, his daughter said, "I don't know what you did with your life during this time, but I'm glad you came back different." And he, his voice breaking, could only reply, "I came back because you were always with me, even if I didn't know it." After that family reunion, Joaquín decided to do something. he'd been putting off for a while. Right. In an old notebook, he began recording every encounter, every person, every story that had crossed his path since that first time with the woman in white. It wasn't a diary, nor a religious testimony. It was his way of remembering that he had witnessed things beyond the understandable. He filled pages with names, dates, phrases that had left their mark on him. And at the end of each story, he always wrote the same line. It wasn't me who drove. It was the love I learned to give. One day, while he was writing in an empty plaza in Guanajuato, a tired-looking man approached him. "Are you Joaquín Rios?" he asked. "I've been looking for you for weeks. I heard about you at a shelter in Morelia. They told me you listen." Joaquín invited him to sit down, closed his notebook, and simply said, "Here I am." The man wept. He shared things he'd never said before. He didn't ask for transportation. He didn't ask for material help. He just needed someone who would look at him without judgment. When he said goodbye, Joaquín opened his notebook again and wrote, "I didn't take anyone on the bus today, but there was still a trip." As time passed, Joaquín began to notice that the woman in white appeared less and less. She no longer accompanied him on every trip, nor did she sit silently by his side. But when he needed her most, she was there. Like that time he got lost on a road closed by landslides and thought he wouldn't make it out. In his fear, he saw her standing at the edge of a ravine, indicating a safe detour. She didn't speak, just pointed. Joaquín obeyed, and minutes later, he was out of danger. He understood then that his guidance was not constant because he no longer needed it at every step. He had learned to trust. One afternoon, stationed on the Pacific coast, Joaquín looked out at the sea for the first time in years. The sound of the waves, the smell of salt, the warm breeze, everything made him feel small and complete at the same time. He remembered the old man he had brought with him long ago, the one who dreamed of seeing the ocean before he died. Now I understand why, he thought. The woman in white appeared beside him, standing wordlessly. Joaquín looked at her and smiled. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She looked at him tenderly, touched his shoulder one last time, and disappeared into the wind. Joaquín didn't feel sadness. He felt that his mission was clear, and that he could now walk alone. From then on, Joaquín continued driving, but he no longer expected miracles. He found them in everyday life, in the smile of a child returning home, in the embrace of two reconciled siblings, in the silence shared with a stranger. Every kilometer traveled was an offering, every stop an opportunity. He had learned that not all journeys are measured in distance. Some are measured in gestures, in the way one looks, listens, and waits. His truck remained the same on the outside, but inside it had become a sanctuary. One day, he stopped the engine in an indigenous community where a group of curious children approached. He showed them the inside of the truck, let them honk the horn, and play with the controls. They laughed as if it were the world's largest amusement park. A teacher watched from afar, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You don't know it, but these children hardly ever laugh. Your presence is a gift." Joaquín didn't respond. He just looked at the little ones and thought about his granddaughter, about the child he had been, about how much a life can change with a gesture as simple as stopping and opening a door. One cold dawn, while crossing a foggy road through sharp curves, he saw a figure walking alone. It was a teenage girl with a backpack on her shoulder, her gaze fixed on the ground. Joaquín braked without thinking. She hesitated, but got in. During the ride, the young woman didn't speak. She just clutched a letter to her chest. Finally, she whispered, "I'm going to apologize to my mom. I left without saying goodbye." Joaquín nodded, without judging, without questioning. When they arrived at their destination, she got out, turned around and said, "Thank you for not asking, for just being there." And once again, like so many times, Joaquín understood that sometimes the simple act of being there can save a life. On another route, he picked up a man in a wheelchair who wanted to attend his son's wedding. He'd been left at a bus stop because the adapted transport hadn't arrived. Joaquín helped him get on board with the help of some passers-by and drove more than 2 hours to arrive on time. The man cried almost the entire way, not out of sadness, but out of emotion. "I thought I was going to miss the most important day of his life," he repeated. When they arrived, his son ran to hug him. Joaquín stood at a distance watching the scene, a single tear falling down his cheek. He knew his presence there wasn't a coincidence. Nothing was, anymore. One day, stopping in a dusty town in Sonora, Joaquín entered an empty church. He wasn't religious, but something compelled him to go in. He sat on a pew in the back and closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He didn't ask for anything. He just stood there, silent. When he opened his eyes, an elderly priest approached him and said, "Sometimes those who help the most are those who kneel the least." Joaquín smiled respectfully. "I'm no one special, Father." The man shook his head. "You are a bridge, and bridges don't make noise, but they change destinies." Joaquín left with that phrase stuck in his chest, like a seal confirming what he already sensed. At a border gas station, a group of migrants was looking for a ride north. Joaquín couldn't take them all, but he chose a mother with her young son. During the ride, she told him about her escape, the dangers, the abuses she'd suffered, and the hope for a better life. Joaquín had no answers, only an ear and a steering wheel. When they arrived at the agreed-upon spot, the woman got out and said, "You're the closest thing to a miracle I've seen on this road." He gave her his last bottle of water and continued on his way. He no longer wondered why these people had appeared. He knew he was part of something bigger, nameless, but with a purpose. As time passed, Joaquín's face began to appear on small, makeshift altars, photos at stations, handwritten thank yous, candles with his name on them. He wasn't comfortable with that, but he didn't reject it either. He knew it wasn't for him, but for what he represented. Not a savior, but a sign that there was still humanity on the road. One afternoon, a young man approached him with a folded photocopy. It was a picture of Joaquín's truck, with the words, "Aquí a ayuda a su esperanza." Who needs hope gets on here. Joaquín kept it in the glove compartment, next to the drawings and letters. It was his map, his compass. At a gathering of former truck drivers, he was invited to tell his story. Joaquín didn't want to talk about miracles or visions. He spoke only of transformation, of how a man hardened by loneliness had begun to listen, of how a vehicle became a refuge. "It's not about saving anyone," he said. "It's about being there when no one else is." In the end, several colleagues approached him with tears in their eyes. One confessed that he had called his son again after years. Another decided to return to his hometown to see his mother. Joaquín needed no further proof. His story no longer belonged to him. It had become a seed. One evening, while crossing an empty plain, Joaquín felt a profound peace. There were no passengers that day, no urgent destination. Just the sun setting slowly, tinting the sky orange, and the engine purring softly. He stopped the truck on the side of the road and got out. He walked a few meters to an open field and sat on the ground. He closed his eyes and breathed. He no longer felt guilt, urgency, or debts to the past. He felt part of something much bigger than himself, something he didn't need to understand, only accept. And in that instant, he knew he had arrived where he never thought he would, himself. That night, the woman in white reappeared. She sat beside him, just like in the beginning. Joaquín said nothing. He just looked at her and smiled. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he repeated, "just like that day by the sea." She looked at him tenderly. "I just kept you company. You did the rest." They remained silent for a long time. Then she stood up, and this time she didn't disappear immediately. She walked slowly toward the horizon, merging with the moonlight. Joaquín watched her until he couldn't make her out anymore. He knew it was the last time, and he didn't feel sadness. He felt gratitude. The next day, Joaquín decided to return home for the first time in a long time, not because he wanted to stop, but because he felt there was some closure there. Upon arriving, he found the facade dusty, the curtains closed and the usual silence, But this time it didn't bother him. He went in, calmly cleaned, made coffee, and opened the windows. In the living room, he placed all the drawings, letters, and photos he had saved on his travels. It wasn't an exhibition, it was an altar. Each story had a space, each person a memory. And in the center, he placed a small plaque with a handwritten phrase, "Love happened here, even though no one saw it." Over the next few days, he wrote a letter to his granddaughter. He didn't talk about exploits or mystical journeys. He only told her what he had learned, that the true miracle wasn't seeing the invisible, but truly looking, that helping wasn't always saving, sometimes it was just staying, that people aren't healed with speeches but with presence. At the end of the letter he wrote, "If you ever feel lost, open a door. Someone like me may be waiting to take you without asking, just out of love." He folded it carefully, put it in an envelope, and placed it inside a book with his name on it. He didn't expect her to read it soon. He just wanted her to know who he really was when she did. In the months that followed, Joaquin continued driving, but at a different pace. He no longer sought out those to help. Now they found him. His presence became legendary among towns, roads, and stations. Some said he was an angel, others that he was just an ordinary man with a big heart. He didn't correct anyone. He knew that what mattered wasn't who he was, but what he left behind: comfort, hope, companionship. He never had a routine again. Every day was different, and in each encounter he found a part of himself he hadn't yet recognized. Subscribe if you think the world needs more stories like this. Your click makes a difference. One afternoon, while he was filling up at a station near the border, a boy approached him timidly. "Is it true that you drive people without asking for anything in return?" Joaquin smiled. "Yes, it's true." The boy looked down and whispered, "So, can you take me to see my dad?" His mother appeared behind him, her eyes filled with suppressed emotion. Joaquin nodded without hesitation. As the boy climbed into the truck, he reflected that although he had traveled thousands of miles, his mission had never been to move bodies, but to move souls. And that, even though he didn't know how many roads lay ahead, he would keep going as long as he had a steering wheel and a heart. One starry night, he stopped. The truck at the top of a hill. From there, the entire valley could be seen illuminated. He got out with his cup of coffee, sat on the edge of the highest rock, and took a deep breath. He wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere, not anymore, because he understood that destiny wasn't a place, but a transformation. He thought of all those he had carried, their voices, their silences, their eyes searching for something, and also of everything they had left him. He had started this journey as an empty man, and now he felt like he was carrying all the stories in the world in his chest. As the sun began to rise, he returned to the truck, started the engine, and smiled. The road opened up before him as always, but now it had a different meaning. It didn't matter how many kilometers remained or how many more people would get on, because he understood that his story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever needed someone to say, "Get in, I'll give you a ride." And as the truck disappeared into the dawn mist, one phrase hung in the air like an eternal promise. The journey was just beginning. Did you make it this far? That says a lot. Subscribing is the easiest way to help us continue telling healing stories. Many years later, when few saw him passing by, some children would ask about the good man's truck. "Is it true he took lost people to their destinations?" they would ask. And the older ones would reply, "Yes, but more than destinations, he took them back to themselves." No one knew exactly what became of Joaquin Rios. Some said he was still driving forgotten roads. Others said he had hung up his keys and lived by the sea. But they all agreed on one thing: there had never been another like him. Because Joaquin's story didn't end when the engine died. It ended in every person who, after crossing paths with him, decided to be a little more human. His truck, his life, his silence bore witness to something sacred: the power to stop, to look, to listen. to open the door. And although there are no plaques with his name, no statues, no tributes, those who knew his story know the truth. Joaquín was a walking miracle, not because he performed magic, but because he was capable of loving a lifetime without expecting anything in return. If this story touched your soul, subscribe now, because as long as you're here, this channel will continue to thrive.